People would later argue about the exact moment it became wrong. Some said it was when the snowman appeared overnight. Others insisted it was when it moved. But the truth is simpler and worse. No one cared enough when it was still possible to stop it. The snowstorm came hard and fast, the kind that shuts down roads and turns the whole town into a white, silent blur. Schools closed, parents stayed home. Children poured outside the moment the wind died down, dragging sleds, laughing too loud in the cold air. On an empty playground behind a row of identical houses, the kids started building something big. At first, it was innocent, a competition, bigger than last winter, bigger than anything they'd done before. They rolled massive snowballs until their gloves soaked through, stacking them clumsily. The base sank into the ground. The middle leaned. The head was too small for the body, crooked and wrong. By sunset, the snowman towered over the playground fence. Too tall, too thin. Its arms, long branches snapped from a nearby tree, hung unevenly, one lower than the other, like it was mid-step. Parents watched from porches and windows. Someone laughed and said it looked creepy. Someone else took a photo. No one told the kids to tear it down. That night, temperatures dropped well below freezing. The next morning, the snowman was no longer on the playground. It stood closer to the houses now. Not much closer, just enough that people questioned their memory. Maybe it had been built there. Maybe snowdrifts played tricks on distance. There were no footprints leading from the playground, just scuffed snow around its base, as if it had been dragged or had shifted its weight. By the third morning, it stood across the street from the elementary school. That's when the cameras were checked. Every camera along the street, doorbells, traffic poles, the school's own security system, showed the same thing. Hours of empty snow-covered ground. No movement, no falling snowman, no pranksters. But the ground told a different story. Around the snowman were deep impressions in the snow, long, narrow, almost like footprints, but stretched, distorted, too far apart to belong to any normal person. That afternoon, a teacher noticed something else. The snowman had a face now. Not stones, not coal. Indentations, pressed carefully into the snow. Eye sockets too deep. A mouth carved just enough to suggest teeth beneath. And for the first time since the storm, children started going missing. By the time the second child vanished, the town stopped pretending it was coincidence. Parties formed before sunrise. Parents walked the streets with red eyes and coffee gone cold in their hands. Police cars idled near the school, engines humming like nervous animals. Everyone avoided looking directly at the snowman standing across from the playground, even though they felt it there, watching. The missing boy was found just before noon. What was left of him, at least. His jacket lay half buried in snow near the base of the snowman. Blue fabric stiff with ice, one sleeve twisted inside out, as if it had been pulled off in a hurry. There were no bloodstains, no signs of a struggle, just the jacket, and a single boot several feet away, upright, perfectly balanced. That was when someone noticed the legs. The snowman's lower half had changed. Where there had once been a simple mound of snow, there were now shapes, rounded, defined, unsettlingly precise. Knees, calves, ankles capering downward into something like feet fused to the frozen ground.
It no longer looked stacked. It looked built. An officer circled it slowly, boots crunching. He crouched near the base and felt the surface with a gloved hand. The snow wasn't powdery anymore. It was compacted, layered, dense, almost like frozen muscle. Someone gagged. Another officer pointed at the arms. The branches were no longer bare. Smaller twigs had been woven into them, bent and snapped into shapes resembling fingers, 5 on each hand, uneven lengths. One finger looked shorter, broken at the tip. That afternoon, they tried to move it. A tow truck was brought in. Chains were wrapped around the torso. The engine roared, metal strained. The chains dug into the snowman's body, but instead of breaking apart, the surface held. The tow truck lurched backward. The snowman did not move. That night, the temperature dropped again. At 2:17 a.m., a doorbell camera across the street briefly flickered. Just one frame glitched before the feed returned to normal. In that single corrupted image, the snowman stood closer to the house. Its head was tilted now, and its mouth, once a shallow groove, was wider, as if it had been pulled open. By morning, a third child was gone, and the snowman had something new pressed into its chest, a shape beneath the ice, small, human, like it was growing something inside itself. By the third disappearance, fear had turned sharp. Classes were canceled indefinitely. Yellow tape wrapped the playground, the school, the surrounding streets. No one let their children out of sight, not even to the bathroom. Curtains stayed drawn, doors were locked long before sunset. And still, the snowman stood there. 2 utility workers were sent to deal with it just after dawn. They didn't call it destroying anymore. Officially, it was removal. A crane arrived, diesel coughing in the cold air. The men moved carefully, avoiding the thing's face as if it could see. Up close, it was worse. The surface wasn't smooth snow at all. It was layered, compressed, almost sculpted. One worker raised a shovel and struck the torso. The sound wasn't a crunch. It was a dull, wet thud. The shovel bounced back. "Jesus," someone whispered. They tried again, harder. The metal edge cracked through the outer layer, splitting the ice. A dark hollow opened beneath, deep, uneven, and wrong. Cold air poured out of it like breath. Then something moved. Not much, just a twitch, a subtle shift beneath the frozen shell. The younger worker staggered backward and slipped, landing hard on his side. As he scrambled to get up, the snow beneath him collapsed inward like a trap door. His leg vanished into the hole. He screamed. Hands grabbed his arms, pulling, boots digging into ice. Something below held on, not gripping, hooking. The scream turned wet, strangled. When they dragged him free, he was missing his boot and most of his foot. The crane operator never touched the controls again. That afternoon, the snowman was taller. Its posture had changed, straighter, balanced. The head no longer leaned awkwardly. It sat square on its shoulders. And there were veins now. Thin blue lines webbed beneath the ice, branching across its chest and arms, pulsing faintly when the sun hit them just right. At sunset, a mother began screaming 2 houses down. Her daughter's bedroom window was open. The bed was empty. In the snow below the window were those same stretched footprints leading away from the house. They stopped at the snowman. That night, emergency crews planned to burn it. They never got the chance. At 11:43 p.m., power across the neighborhood cut out at once. In the darkness, something heavy shifted outside, and for the first time since it appeared, witnesses swore they heard it make a sound. Not a roar, not a growl, a low, uneven inhale, like lungs filling for the first time.
It wasn't the parents who noticed the pattern. It was the children. Those who were still alive began drawing the same thing, independently, in different houses, at different times. Teachers, those who still came in to pack classrooms, found the pictures tucked into desks, dropped in hallways, hidden inside books. A tall figure, too tall, long arms dragging near the ground, a face with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched wide, never smiling, and always the same detail, lines inside the body, branching like cracks or veins. When asked where they'd seen it, the children gave the same answer. Outside, by the school, in my window, in my room. One boy, no older than 6, refused to sleep unless every light in the house was on. When his mother finally pressed him, he whispered something that made her hands start shaking. "He practices," the boy said. "Practices what?" "Standing still." That night, police monitored the Snowman from a distance. Spotlights bathed it in harsh white light. Officers rotated shifts, eyes burning, fingers numb on their radios. Nothing moved. At 3:06 a.m., one officer swore he saw the Snowman's chest rise. At 3:07, another reported frost forming on the inside of his windshield, in branching, vein-like patterns. At 3:09, every radio crackled at once. A child's voice came through, thin, whispering, calm. "I'm cold." The transmission cut off. They traced the signal to a house 3 blocks away. When officers forced the door open, they found the living room untouched, toys neatly stacked, shoes by the door, a mug still warm on the table. The child's bedroom window was open. Snow covered the floor in a long, dragged smear. Outside, fresh tracks led away, long steps, too far apart, pressing deep into the ground. By morning, the Snowman's hands were different. The fingers were no longer twig-thin. They were thicker now, rounded, jointed. Nails, dark shapes beneath the ice, pressed outward from the tips. And its face. Its eyes were deeper, set back, focused. Someone finally said it out loud. "It's copying them." No one argued, because that afternoon a teacher recognized the tilt of its head. Her daughter used to stand that way when she listened. Her daughter disappeared 2 days ago, and the Snowman was no longer facing the street. It was facing the houses, as if choosing who came next. The snow kept falling, slow and steady, like the town was being buried on purpose. Authorities decided the remaining children would be evacuated at night, quietly, before panic spread any further. No sirens, no announcements, just a single school bus, windows blacked out, engine running low and steady at the edge of the neighborhood. 23 children were counted as they boarded. Each one was checked against a list, names whispered, hands held tight. Parents were told the bus would take them somewhere warm and safe until things were under control. The bus doors folded shut at 9:18 p.m. Several people noticed the Snowman had turned slightly. No one said anything.
The bus pulled away, tires crunching softly over fresh snow. It reached the end of the street, turned the corner, and vanished. Not crashed, not stopped. Gone. The radio crackled once, static, then silence. Search teams followed the tire tracks almost immediately. They didn't go far. The tracks led down the road and simply ended. No skid marks, no turn, just empty snow where the bus should have continued. Behind them, something else marked the ground. Deep impressions, heavy, slow, leading away from the road, toward the snowman. By morning, parents were screaming. Some tried to rush the thing, clawing at its frozen surface until their fingers bled. Others collapsed in the snow, sobbing, staring up at it as if waiting for it to answer. Because the snowman had changed again. It was enormous now, taller than the school roof, its torso thick and solid, proportions finally right, terrifyingly right. Beneath the ice, dark shapes were packed close together, layered, pressing outward. Too many to count. Its face was no longer crude. The eyes had lids, the mouth had depth, and inside the open curve of it, faintly visible through frost and shadow, were rows of shapes that looked disturbingly like teeth. At noon, someone noticed something worse. The snowman cast a shadow, even though the sun was behind it. That evening, the snow stopped for the first time in days. The silence that followed was unbearable, because in that silence, people realized something. The snowman hadn't followed the bus. The bus had gone to it. And whatever it had taken that night, it didn't need snow to keep growing anymore.
They cut into it at dawn. Not because they believed it would work, but because there was nothing left to try. Floodlights surrounded the snowman, casting hard shadows that twisted its shape against the empty buildings. The air smelled wrong up close, not rot, not smoke, something sterile and cold, like a freezer that had been closed too long. The first cut came from a thermal saw. Ice screamed. Steam burst outward as the blade sank into the torso. The sound wasn't mechanical anymore. It was wet, resistant, uneven. When the outer layer finally split, something inside shifted, settling with a heavy internal slide. A cavity opened. Inside was not snow. They found layers, compacted clothing fused together by ice, jackets, backpacks, scarves, mittens, fabric pressed so tightly it looked grown together. Beneath that were shapes too smooth, too curved to be debris. Bones, small ones, bent ones, some cracked, some intact, all arranged in a way that made no sense for a pile. Curved along the inner walls, braced, supporting, like a rib cage. A medic vomited into the snow. Another person screamed that there were names written inside, scratched into the ice with fingernails, overlapping, frantic, unfinished. Then they found the bus. Not the whole thing, just the door. Frozen into the snowman's back, half swallowed by ice, the yellow paint dulled and flaking. The folding mechanism was bent inward, as if something enormous had leaned against it from the inside. Someone whispered, "It didn't eat them." The thought landed heavy and final. It used them. The snowman shuddered. Not violently, not suddenly. A slow compression ran through its body, ice tightening, layers locking into place.
The exposed cavity sealed itself as frost crept over it, erasing everything beneath a new, smooth surface. The veins pulsed brighter. Power across the floodlights flickered. Every single person stepped back at once because the snowman's chest rose and fell. Later, when the area was cleared, they realized something else had changed. There were no more footprints, no signs of movement at all. The snowman hadn't been walking anymore. It didn't need to. It had grown roots. Thick columns of ice spread from its base into the ground, cracking pavement, threading beneath buildings, burrowing deep and unseen. That night, people began to hear knocking, not on doors, from under their floors, slow, patient, like something learning the shape of a house from below. And in the deepest part of the town, pipes began to freeze, not with water, but with breath.
By the 7th day, the town no longer belonged to its residents. Concrete barriers sealed the roads. Armed personnel replaced patrol cars. Unmarked trucks arrived before sunrise and parked in tight formation, engines never fully shutting off. The word containment was used often, carefully, like a charm meant to hold fear in place. No one used the word kill. They built a perimeter around the snowman, steel fencing, thermal sensors, motion detectors drilled into the frozen ground. The thing stood perfectly still at the center, taller than ever, its surface smooth and pale, almost polished. From a distance, it looked peaceful. Up close, it hummed. Not audibly, not exactly, but instruments picked it up. A low-frequency vibration traveling through ice and soil, rattling teeth, making eyes water. The readings didn't match any known machinery. They pulsed in a rhythm disturbingly close to a heartbeat. The first explosion was meant to be surgical. Charges detonated along the snowman's lower torso, blasting ice outward in a thunderous crack. For a moment, hope surged. Chunks of frozen mass scattered across the snow, steam rising. Then the pieces stopped melting. They twitched. Thin fractures spidered across them, sealing shut. Frost crawled back over exposed surfaces, knitting the damage together faster than anyone could reload. And beneath it all, the vibration grew stronger. Someone shouted that the snowman's shadow was moving. The sun hadn't shifted. The shadow stretched anyway, crawling across the ground, slipping under trucks, climbing walls. Wherever it touched, ice bloomed instantly, white frost spreading like mold. Inside the command vehicle, screens began to glitch. Reflections appeared where none should be. In dark monitors, polished helmets, glass windshields, faces stared back that didn't belong to anyone present. Children's faces, pressing outward, mouths open in silent screams that fogged the glass from the inside. Then the ground split, not beneath the snowman, but around the perimeter. Ice surged up through asphalt and concrete, thick columns erupting like frozen limbs, tearing through vehicles, wrapping around fencing, dragging it downward. The roots had moved. They weren't holding it in place, they were spreading. At 6:42 p.m., the order to retreat was given. At 6:43, communications went dead. Witnesses later said the snowman finally moved then, not by stepping forward, but by straightening fully, ice cracking like knuckles. Its head turned slowly, deliberately, toward the line of houses beyond the barricades, toward warmth, toward people. That night, temperatures rose above freezing for the first time. The snowman didn't melt. It steamed.
and in the drifting fog around it, silhouettes walked, small, uneven shapes circling its base, fading in and out of view. Still attached, still part of it, learning how to stand.
After containment failed, the town emptied in waves. First responders, then soldiers, then anyone who could still drive. Cars slid through slush-choked roads, headlights cutting tunnels through fog that smelled faintly of ice and metal. Those who stayed behind did so because they had nowhere else to go, or because they were too afraid to move. The snowman no longer stood alone. Ice threaded outward from it in every direction, crawling beneath streets, wrapping around foundations, climbing walls like frost on living skin. Houses closest to it were sealed shut by morning, doors frozen in place, windows webbed with thick white bloom from the inside. People were disappearing without leaving their beds. One man was found sitting upright at his kitchen table, coffee still steaming, chair frozen to the floor. Beneath the table, the wood had split open. Ice had pushed up from below, wrapping around his legs, his torso, his throat. His face was calm, as if he'd gone to sleep mid-sentence. Children vanished faster than anyone else, not dragged through windows, not taken from the street. They were simply gone. Parents would turn away for seconds, long enough to grab a blanket, answer a phone, and come back to empty rooms dusted with frost. Small handprints appeared on walls afterward, pressed outward from inside the ice, then slowly erased as the cold thickened. The snowman was changing again. Its surface darkened in places, turning translucent. Shapes moved beneath it now, shifting independently. Arms formed and unformed along its sides, too many, overlapping, retracting back into the mass when they failed to balance. It wasn't trying to look human anymore. It was trying to move like one. At night, people saw it in places it couldn't possibly be. Reflected in bathroom mirrors behind them, standing at the end of hallways that were too short to contain it, looking back from dark television screens when the power flickered on for a moment, always closer than before, always watching something specific. Heat sensors on abandoned drones showed the truth no one wanted to say aloud. The snowman was following warmth. Bodies, running engines, electrical current, heartbeats. Wherever people gathered, ice bloomed beneath them. By the 8th night, fires broke out across town, not from flame, but from pressure. Pipes burst, boilers ruptured, walls split as ice forced its way through spaces meant for living. And still, through it all, the snowman remained intact. At sunrise, one final message broadcast briefly on an emergency channel before cutting to static. A child's voice, not scared, not crying, almost curious. "It's easier now," the voice said. "It doesn't need the cold anymore." Across the empty streets, the snowman turned its head toward the last cluster of occupied houses and took its first step. The ground didn't shake. The ice beneath it simply flowed forward, carrying it along, like the town itself had decided to move closer to the thing it had made. By the 9th day, there was no one left to count the missing. The town existed only on abandoned satellite feeds and static-filled emergency channels.
Roads had collapsed inward, split by ice that no longer behaved like frozen water. It curved, it reached, it waited. What remained of the snowman now touched the clouds. Up close, its form had lost all pretense of a body. Limbs emerged and dissolved along its surface. Half-formed heads pressed outward and sank back in. Faces briefly recognizable before being absorbed again. The ice had turned clear enough to see through, and what lay inside was layered history. Not just children, adults, animals, fragments of houses, pieces of cars, electrical wire threaded through bone and frozen flesh. It wasn't building itself anymore. It was integrating. Sensors left behind by the evacuation drones picked up something impossible. Heat signatures inside the structure. Not residual warmth, not decay, metabolism. Deep within the mass, movement followed patterns, slow, coordinated contractions that pulsed outward through the ice. The vibrations no longer matched a heartbeat. They matched breathing. That was when the researchers, listening from hundreds of miles away, realized the truth. The snow had never mattered. The cold was just how it began. What the children had built wasn't a creature. It was a framework, a shape that taught something buried in the ground how to organize itself. The ice hadn't animated it. It had revealed it. Beneath the town, far below foundations and pipes, something ancient had waited, spread thin through soil and stone, dormant, incomplete. The snowstorm had fed it structure, the children had given it form, and the missing had given it purpose. Late that night, seismic monitors recorded a shift beneath the town. Not an earthquake, but a slow, deliberate realignment. Ice veins withdrew from houses, streets, even the snowman's outer shell. The mass began to sink. Buildings cracked as something immense detached itself from the surface. The snowman collapsed inward, folding, compressing, shedding ice like skin sloughing from a body that no longer needed it. When dawn came, the town was gone. Not destroyed, hollowed. A vast depression marked where it once stood, rimmed with frost and steam. At the center yawned a shaft descending into darkness, walls smoothed and glassed over with ice that pulsed faintly with inner light. Far below, something moved. And somewhere, carried on a signal that should no longer function, a final transmission repeated over and over. Not a warning, not a scream, a child's voice, layered and echoing, speaking with many mouths at once. "We're finished learning up here." A pause, then, "Now it's your turn to come down."
Spring arrived early that year. Snow receded across the state. Rivers swelled. News anchors spoke carefully about a geological collapse and a restricted zone. Maps were redrawn. The town's name was quietly removed from weather reports, then from traffic systems, then from memory. Officially, nothing was ever found. No bodies, no survivors, no explanation that held. The crater remained, sealed off by concrete and steel, guarded long after anyone remembered why. Instruments placed around its edge showed no movement, no heat, no vibration, just dead ground. They declared it over. But elsewhere, far from the hole in the earth, children began building again. It started in a suburb 2 states away after a late-season snowstorm no one had predicted. Schools closed, parents worked from home, kids spilled into backyards and empty lots, laughing, rolling snow between mittened hands.
They didn't plan anything big, not at first, but the piles grew taller than expected. The snow packed strangely well. The base held firm no matter how high they stacked it. One child stepped back and tilted their head. "It needs arms," they said. Another added stones, not for eyes, but pressed deep, too far in. Someone carved a mouth without realizing why, a long one. By dusk, the shape stood finished, too tall, too balanced, almost right. That night the temperature stayed above freezing. The snowman didn't sag. Cameras nearby malfunctioned briefly, just a flicker. One frame lost. No one noticed. In the morning, a dog refused to go outside, whining at the door. Frost traced the inside of windows in branching lines. In the yard, the snowman stood a little closer to the house than before. Beneath it, the ground was warm. Far below, deep where no frost should reach, something old tightened its hold on a new framework. Ice threaded downward, seeking shape, seeking structure, seeking hands willing to build without understanding. And as the first child that spring went missing, experts would later agree on one thing. It had never been a creature. It had been a lesson, and humanity was very good at teaching it again.